Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Smithsonian Science How. I'm Maggie Benson. We have a really awesome show. Today we have paleontologist Dr. Gene Hunt from the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. Gene, thank you so much for being here today.
Good to be here, Maggie.
So Gene, we're going to learn a little bit about your research today. But before we do that, let's start by learning why you became a paleontologist in the first place.
Sure. So in college I studied biology, and over 20 years ago now I applied to an internship at this museum actually. And instead of placing me in a biology department like I'd asked for, they ended up putting me in the paleobiology department. And I had a great summer studying fossils and kind of put me on the path to becoming a paleontologist.
That's exciting. 20 years ago as an intern and today the scientist.
That's right.
So can you describe to us what paleontology is?
Sure. Paleontology is the study of ancient life. And paleontologists study fossils, the remains of these ancient life. Usually it's the hard parts that survive, so we're looking at mostly bones and teeth and shells and things like that. Paleontologists do lots of different things. They'll try to look at the fossils and figure out how they made a living, what they ate, how they moved around, and even things like understanding how species change over time or why they go extinct.
So extinction is a really important factor there in the study of paleontology and figuring out maybe why things go extinct, correct? So I want to ask you why things do go extinct, but before you answer that, I think we should ask our viewers. What do you think?
All right.
Viewers, here's an opportunity to participate in a live poll with us. You can respond using the window that appears to the right of your video screen. If you don't see this screen, then you may have to minimize your video window. So, take a look at the poll and tell us, species may go extinct from volcanoes, asteroids, climate change, or a new predator. Take a moment to think about it and put your response in the window that appears to the right of the video. This is the same place where you can post questions for us to answer during our live broadcast today. Gene, we can see the answers coming in together, and it looks like there's a smattering of responses across the board. Volcanoes, asteroids, climate change all may cause species to go extinct. What do you think?
Yeah, in fact, those are all good answers, actually. So species generally go extinct when something changes in their environment such that it becomes less suitable for them to survive and prosper. And those changes can be triggered by these large environmental changes, such as volcanoes or asteroid or meteorite impacts, such as the one that hit Earth 66 million years ago that precipitated or caused the extinction of the dinosaurs and lots of other species. And paleontologists actually know of good examples in the fossil record where extinctions have been caused by all four of these factors.
Interesting. So is there something within a species that makes it more susceptible to extinction or able to survive?
Yeah, so we'll have even these big events occur and lots of species may go extinct, but some of them sail through no problem whatsoever. And so the question is, why do some species survive and others don't? And usually it has to do with the kind of traits or features that those species have. Some species are sort of better suited for whatever conditions occur after their environment has changed. So one example your viewers might be familiar with is that of a polar bear. Polar bears are animals that spend a lot of time on sea ice. They hunt on sea ice. They spend much of their time there. But with global warming, the amount of sea ice is decreasing steadily. And many scientists are worried as global warming continues, the amount of sea ice is going to decrease so much that polar bears are going to be in danger of going extinct because they're so dependent on sea ice for their lifestyle.
Interesting. Now, some scientists have this theory that the amount of differences between male and females in the same species may lead to vulnerability and extinction, and that's some of the subject of your research. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's a hypothesis. That's an idea that scientists are now very interested in testing. And we have some examples here of the kind of traits that you see that some species being different from other species. We call this sexual dimorphism, when the males of one species look different from the females of that species. A prominent example, you often see birds. Birds, the cardinal like I'm pointing to here, the male is a brightly colored red feather, and the female is a more drab kind of brown color. And it's true for other birds. Probably the most famous example is that of a peacock, where the male has this ridiculously large tail feathers that it sort of uses to attract females. Other kind of traits you can see here what differ between males and females are things like, well, the graphic shows a lion there with the famous mane of the male.
Of course.
And then on this table we have also frogs, where the males are not so much look different, but they actually behave different. They'll have noisy calls to try to attract the females. And on the table, we have example of antlers. And deer relatives, the males have antlers and the females do not.
So what's all this showing us about? What are all these differences? What does it boil down to?
Basically, it comes down to males wanting to attract or successfully able to defend or acquire a mate. So there's sort of two ways this happens. One, the male gets it by being attractive. And so in the case of birds, the bright colors like the peacock, the female birds prefer the showier, brighter colored males. In other cases, these traits come in when the males have contests with other males to gain access to the females. So, for example, deer and their relatives, the males will have these wrestling matches with their antlers. And in other cases, males are just bigger than each other. So males are just bigger than females, and the males have contests among each other, and the larger male usually wins in those contests.
So does this boil down to the males, when they're showier or have bigger antlers, being stronger, having a bigger investment in some way?
That's right. So in the males, when they're building these structures, they're building a bigger bodies, they're building these feathers, these pigments require energy. This is all energy that the males are doing that are putting towards gaining mates and not putting towards survival.
So what about in species where you can't tell the difference between males and females? Because I can think of a lot of those where you really can't tell the difference.
That's right, and it all comes down to the biology of that species. And so I'll talk about two examples. The first is called an elephant seal. These are two kinds of seals. The first is an elephant seal. And as the graphic shows, these are huge animals. The males are sometimes over 5,000 pounds, more than triple the weight of the females.
Wow. So which one is the male here?
It's the dark one in the back. It has its sort of flipper possessively over the smaller female in the front. And in these species, the males basically defend a patch of beach, and they fight off all other males around that patch of beach and try to mate with all the females within that patch. And so over time, in that species, this has favored males to get much larger than females to sort of better able to win these contests.
And is there another example that you have where they don't look that much different, these
Sure.
seals?
Yeah, the next example is called a crabeater seal. And you see the graphic here, and there are two animals shown, and I honestly couldn't tell you which one was male, which one was female, because they look so similar. And in this species, they don't have the same kind of male contests that favors the much larger males than females.
Now, is there a cost associated with the male being overtly showy in some way, or stronger or bigger?
There definitely is. And so the costs of the pigments to make the bright colors, the cost of the energy to build the antlers, to build a bigger body, that's all energy that those males are spending trying to find a mate or secure a mate rather than actually going around the business of surviving.
And does it put them at risk of predation, perhaps? I know that peacock is very showy.
That's right. So you have examples where the traits are very cumbersome, right? So that peacock is likely to sort of be more easily caught by predators. Brighter birds are more likely to be seen by predators. Loud, noisy male frogs are more likely to be caught by predators, and so on. So there's a number of costs that can occur to the males when they invest in these showy male features.
And so your research, it goes around this hypothesis about this sexual dimorphism, the major differences between males and females, and if there's a correlation between that species going extinct.
That's right. So there's a suggestion that those males, when they're spending all this energy, devoting all this energy to being larger bodied and all these sort of weapons and extravagant features, they might be more vulnerable when the environment does change.
All right. So we're going to learn a little bit more about your research in a minute, and for now, we are going to take some more student questions.
All right.
So we have one here from Tina, and Tina wants to know, do any females have displays?
Tina, it's actually a very good question. By and large, it's most of the time, in the vast majority of cases, it's males. But in a few cases, it is actually reversed, and it's sort of often interesting when that happens because usually the females are picky about choosing their mates because they're investing more in reproduction, but the reverse happens when the males are investing more in reproduction. For example, if you know seahorses, the males are basically pregnant, they carry the young, and in those cases, the females do more displays.
Oh, interesting. So we have another question, and this one comes from Peter. And Peter asks, how do extinctions compare on land and at sea?
It's a good question. I'd say there are a lot of commonalities, and most often we see more extinctions in land and in sea, both in times when these environments are changing the most. And some of the biggest extinctions in the history of life have equally affected land and sea. For example, when the dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, a whole bunch of other species went extinct at land, and there was really very severe extinction in the ocean as well.
Great questions. Keep them coming. This one comes from Paul. Which cause of extinction occurs most often in fossils, or the fossil record?
That's hard to say, Paul, but it's a very good question. It's often very hard for us to understand why a specific species goes extinct because we don't know everything about the circumstances when it went extinct. what we usually try to do instead is actually look for general patterns across species. So we might see test through a certain time period if larger body things are more likely to go extinct than smaller body things. And we sort of work from those kind of general patterns.
So we have another question, but this one comes in by video, so let's have a look.
Okay.
My name is Paula, and I was wondering if whether the male being fancier or the female being fancier correlates to the rate of extinction.
A nice question there by Paula.
Yes.
About displays.
Thank you for your question, Paula. Yes, it's almost always the male that is the showier sex. So they're basically, both males and females want to find mates, but the male job is to be showy and to beat off other males or to knock off other males. And it's usually the female's job to be picky or choosy about who she mates with.
So let's learn a little bit more about your research, Jean. We've started a little bit to learn about your hypothesis in understanding extinction rates. But you are a paleontologist, so how are you doing this using fossils?
That's a good question. So in many ways, it's an advantage, actually, to use fossils to try to get questions of extinction, because if you're just looking at the modern fauna, we actually don't know anything about those species that went extinct, so it becomes difficult for us to know what traits or what kind of factors are important in extinction. When we have the fossil record, we can look at species through time and see what traits or what features tend to be associated with extinction and what other traits might be associated with survival.
So what kind of fossils are you using to be able to test this hypothesis?
I'm studying a kind of fossil called an ostracode.
And what is an ostracode?
An ostracode is a type of crustacean. There's a picture they're shown there on the screen. They're related to shrimp and crabs. They have two shells, kind of like a clam, but they're tiny. So they're like a millimeter or 1/25 of an inch, or the size of a grain of sand, if you will.
Very small.
Very small, exactly. And you could think of it as a tiny little clam, and if you opened up the clam, on the inside there's this little shrimpy-looking thing, like you could see, in this case, crawling or swimming around.
They're kind of cute for little
I think so too.
crustaceans. So I can see that there was video of them there. Mm-hmm. So they're clearly not extinct. They're still around today. Mm-hmm. What kind of habitat do they live in now, and did they live in the past?
Yeah, so ostracodes have a great fossil record going back almost 500 million years, and there's still plenty of them around today. And we find them today in basically any wet environment, in ponds, lakes, rivers, even puddles sometimes. All the way to the ocean, to the bottom of the deep sea, you'll find ostracodes.
Wow, interesting. So I'm still curious, though, why ostracodes are a good model specimen for you to test your hypothesis. But before you tell us, let's get the students involved again.
All right.
Viewers, here's another opportunity to participate in a live poll. Tell us what you think. Ostracode fossils are useful because they are abundant, they are soft-bodied, males and females look different, or ostracodes go extinct easily. Take a moment to think about it and put your response in the window that appears to the right of your video. If you don't see it, try minimizing your video screen or refreshing your page. Jean, we can both see that 91% of our viewers so far think that they're useful because they're abundant.
That's an important part of it. And one of the advantages of working with such tiny fossils is you can collect some rock and find lots and lots of specimens. And when you have lots of specimens, it's easier to tell or to sort out the differences between males and females. For example, you couldn't do this with dinosaurs because for most dinosaurs, you find just one specimen.
So you can actually tell the difference between these tiny crustaceans, which one is a male and which one is a female?
And that's actually even the more important aspect of this. So most of the time, in almost any fossils you look at, we have no idea which ones are male and female. But ostracods are different. They're one of the few groups that you can look at. And even if the fossil is 100 million years old, we can tell which ones are female and which ones are male.
That's actually pretty cool. So can you tell us how you tell the difference?
Sure. So when we look at the living ostracods, we notice that the males, when you look at their shells, the male shells are more elongate. They're sort of more stretched out like this.
Like the one we see here?
Yes, exactly. So the specimen on the left is a male, and it's more stretched out horizontally, whereas a specimen on the right is a female, and it's a little bit more squat in shape.
Interesting. So is this a general rule of thumb across ostracodes that the male is typically more elongate?
Across the major group of ostracodes that we're looking at, yes, it is.
Cool. So I think we actually have another picture of a pair of ostracodes, but they're not labeled. Do you think we should ask our viewers if they can tell which one is the male and which one is the female?
Definitely.
Awesome. So let's take a look. Again, this is, you can respond using the poll window that appears to the right of your video. Tell us which one you think is male, the one on the left or the one on the right. Remember what Jean taught us, that the males are typically more elongate. So we have a very large proportion, 93%, that voted left. The male was on the left-hand side. How'd they do?
They got it right. The majority got it right. The more elongate form, the elongate specimen on the left, was in fact the male.
Now, looking at these two specimens, that male, the one on the left, it also looks like it's bigger. Does size have anything to do with telling the difference between male and female?
It can. In this case, that male is bigger, and in some of the species, the males are a good bit bigger than others. But we also find other species for which the males and females are almost exactly the same size, and even some species for which the male is actually smaller.
So in this example, the male here, it definitely looks longer.
It is longer, and it is bigger. This is the opposite kind of example. So on the specimen on the left, you can see still it's more elongated, it's more stretched out. That is the male, but if you also look at it, it's much smaller than the female specimen on the right. So among the ostracodes, we see both patterns, where males are bigger and males can be even smaller.
So as a scientist here at the Smithsonian, you must have had to study a lot of ostracode specimens to be able to tell the difference between these males and these females.
We did. We studied many thousands of specimens in the course of this study.
So how do you actually get these ostracodes to be able to study them?
Well, we collect them in the field. So what we do is with these fossils are so tiny, you can't just walk out and look for them and then pick up the fossil, right? They're the size of a grain of sand or half of a poppy seed. So what you do instead is you don't even try to find the fossils. You just collect a bunch of rock and you hope for the best. And you hope that there are a bunch of ostracodes inside those rock. And so, for example, we would use a shovel or a rock hammer to collect a piece of rock. This piece of rock actually is about 60 million years old.
So you literally just chip away some rocks.
Chip away some rocks, and we bring it back to the lab, back to the museum, soak it to sort of break down the rock, run it through a sieve. So like this, it's basically a very fine screen. And then when we're done with that, we end up with a jar of stuff that looks like this, which is basically the sort of little sand grains that sort of made up the rock originally, mixed with a whole bunch of little fossils mixed in.
So I'm not a trained paleontologist. I can't see any ostracodes here.
Yes.
Is this a rich specimen or a rich sample? So there are ostracodes in there?
It turns out this one is. We've looked at it, and there are probably 10,000 ostracodes in this jar, I would say. We've already pulled out several hundred already. And you see, we can't see them just like this. So what we do is we pour them onto a picking tray like this, and look very closely under the microscope and use a paintbrush to actually pick out all the little fossils that we see.
And what's the end result? What do you end up having? I see something here that looks like slides.
Yeah, so these are the slides that we store the fossils that we eventually get at, we eventually pull out. And we sort of pull out all the fossils we can. And if you look, all the tiny little white dots, each of those is an individual ostracode.
So they're tiny, but you can see them.
You can see them with your eye, yes. Like you can see a grain of sand with your eye.
Yeah. Here they are a little bigger.
Yeah, there's another shot close-up of what one of those slides looks like.
So how long does it take you to put a slide like that together?
Many, many hours. But thankfully, I have help. There are people I work with, there are students and others that sort of help with this project.
So where do you go to collect these ostracodes? Can I go to any rocky outcrop and chip away some rocks and find them?
Not quite everyone. You have to make sure you're in the right environment and the right age. And for the study that we're working on now, we're focusing on an area called the coastal plain of North America. And so on the map there, it's that green area. So it starts in Texas, winds around Florida, and goes all the way north towards New Jersey.
Now, what you told me was that ostracodes live in aquatic habitats, water habitats, and that area is clearly land.
It is.
So how does that add up?
Well, at the time we were collecting these rocks are about 65 to 85 million years old. That part of the United States was actually underwater. So the climate was much warmer, so there wasn't as much ice at the poles. And that ice, that water goes into the ocean, the sea levels are higher. So you have these long, big, shallow seas that covered much of what we know as the United States today.
So that time period, the late Cretaceous, what time period is that? How many years ago?
from about 65 to about 85 million years ago.
And that was a time where there were actually dinosaurs on Earth, including T-Rex at the very end, right?
That's right, and some of the species we're looking at lived at the same time as T-Rex, and a number of the species even went extinct right at the same time the dinosaurs did.
Wow, interesting. So once you collect your samples and you organize them onto slides, how do you actually test your hypothesis about the major differences between males and females having an impact on extinction?
So we need two pieces of information. The first is we have to measure a lot of the ostracodes and measure how big the difference is between males and females, and sort of figure out which species have the males that are much bigger than females and which ones have the males that are much not as big as, or about the same size as females. Then we do that across as many species as we can, and what we have to do next is figure out how long each of those species lived on planet Earth, how long they survived on planet Earth.
And how do you do that?
Well, we look at sort of the rock record, and so this is a sort of one of our outcrop, one of our places, localities where we collect fossils for. And the rocks come in layers. The oldest layers are on the top, and the youngest layers are on the bottom, so time goes from bottom to top. And we know the age of the layers, in short, because a lot of other scientists have worked on these and sort of figured out how old the different layers are. And then we know where we sampled each species, and from that we can figure out how long each species survived on planet Earth. Some species survive just a really short period of time, say a couple 100,000 years. Some species survive for 10 or 20 million years.
Which is what we're looking at here?
Yes. And so when we want to test the hypothesis, what we want to see, the hypothesis makes a prediction that's sort of summarized on this graphic here. So for simplicity, imagine that you have two kinds of species, those in which the males are much bigger than the females. So these males are really investing a lot in their reproduction.
So the ones on the left?
Right, because they're the ones on the left. You see the male on the left is much bigger than the female on the right. And then we have another group of species which say the males are much smaller. They're not investing very much in reproduction. So presumably, they would predict that they can survive better. And what we're actually looking for is to see whether or not those two groups of species survive different amounts of time in the fossil record. And that's represented by those vertical lines. So if you survive a long period of time in the fossil record, that means that line is very long. You've been found in lots of samples, therefore you lived a long time. If those vertical lines are short, that means they didn't survive very long at all. That means they went extinct rather easily. And that's sort of what the hypothesis would predict.
So your hypothesis, are you finding that it's true?
We're finding support for it. In fact, so that's the pattern. It's very similar to what we're finding. We're finding that those males for which the males are much bigger, those species for which the males are much bigger than the females, those species tend not to last as long in the fossil record. They go extinct much more easily than those species for which males and females are more similar.
Interesting. So what kind of impact does this have on research that's happening across different groups of animals, either in the fossil record or living today?
Yeah, so we found this to hold, or to seem to be the case in the ostracodes we're looking at, but it also might apply to other animals that we might be interested in. And people are interested in the conservation of lots of living things. And so this adds another factor we might consider when looking at living species, because if those species are really dimorphic, have males that are very different than females, maybe we should be a little bit more concerned about them. But ultimately, we'll take work by other scientists to sort of test this idea in other systems to see how broadly it holds.
Interesting. Jean, thank you so much for helping us understand a little bit more about ostracodes and your research here at the Smithsonian. Let's get to some of these student questions.
All right.
Okay, this one comes in from Carrie. Is it possible to tell from a fossil if an animal is poisonous or venomous?
Carrie, that's a very good question. I can answer it very shortly. No. The only way you can know is if they have a living relative that's venomous or poisonous. Or there's probably a couple occasions where the actual venom injecting structure is supported under exceptional cases, but usually we don't know.
You would have to have an exceptional fossil to be able to see that structure, I'm sure.
Yes.
This one is from Gabriel. What do you think wiped out the dinosaurs?
Gabriel, good question. So the leading hypothesis that wiped out the dinosaurs, it was triggered by the impact of this meteorite that hit right about 66 million years ago. We actually know where the impact crater it hit, right off the coast of Mexico in the Yucatan Peninsula. And we have lots of evidence that a meteorite hit at that time, and lots of things went extinct in the time after. There's still some things to be worked out in terms of how exactly the meteorite hitting translated to lots of species going extinct. Presumably, climate was affected when you had sort of a nuclear winter type thing. You had sort of lots of species go extinct and the food would get worse. There's lots of stuff to work out. But in short, the trigger was that meteorite hitting the Earth 66 million years ago.
Great question. Keep them coming. So this one comes from Owasso Middle School, and I think they're referring to the video that we watched earlier of the live ostracodes. And they asked, do they lay eggs or have live birth? One of them looked pregnant.
That's a very good observation. Owasso Middle School. In fact, one of those ostracodes did have eggs inside, and it varies. Some ostracodes lay their eggs, and then they sort of go away freely. Sometimes females will brood them inside their shell, and that's what the viewer picked up on.
So is that what we're seeing sometimes with the major size differences between the males and the females?
Probably not in our case. So the group of ostracodes we were working on, brooding is not very common. Mostly they just lay their eggs and let them be.
Great. Great question and great observation. This one comes in from Jenny. Did you name ostracodes? What does the name mean?
I have been involved working with other scientists who have named some ostracodes. The only one I can remember offhand was named, the species name was Tom Cronini.
That sounds like a person.
It was named after Tom Cronin, who is a scientist who studies ostracodes.
Which is a common thing in the scientific community,
yes.
to name species that you identify after yourself or colleagues.
It's actually
right?
bad form to name it after yourself.
Really?
Yes, but you can name it after colleagues, and that's quite common.
It's good to know. You should have a lot of friends then. We have another question. This one comes in by video again, so let's have a look.
All right.
Hi, I'm Claire, and I was wondering if there are any other species you might study to help you figure out more about extinction.
Good question from Claire.
Yes, Claire. So the key thing to learn more about extinction is you want a group of animals that has a good fossil record. So you can track them through time and get a very detailed understanding of when they go extinct and what is happening when they go extinct. And that gives you the best chance of trying to figure out what caused those extinctions.
Great. This one comes from Monzi. Are the ostracodes from Citizen Science Day part of this study?
Yes, Manzi, they are. So what that question is referring to is we did a citizen science event here at the museum, and people came in and picked ostracodes actually from this sample.
Really?
Yes, they picked it from this sample, and that's part of the study that we're working on today. So,
Manzi, if you were part of that
yes.
day, thank you
Thank
for
you
helping us.
Exactly.
So that's actually a great question. Are there opportunities for people, students, interns to be able to get involved in your work or other kind of paleontology work?
Yeah, so there are often internship opportunities like I had when I was in college at this museum. We have something like 200 or more interns over the summer. I help run actually an internship program called NHRE, Natural History Research Experiences. So if any of the sort of college students out there are interested, I encourage them to sort of look into that.
Wonderful. So we only have time for one more question. We're going to take this one from Sonia. Do you study ostracodes from around the world?
Sometimes. So I've focused in on a couple different areas. So for this present study, Sonia, we're looking just at the coastal plain, but we've gone all the way from Texas all the way up to some samples in New Jersey. So we've spanned that range. Before this, I largely worked on, or I studied ostracodes that were found in the bottom of the deep sea, and those came from all over. So you basically send out ships, they drill cores, they bring up the cores back, and then we sort of request the sample. So in that study, I looked at samples from all over the world ocean.
Wonderful. Jean, thank you so much for being here today and helping us understand a little bit more about sexual dimorphism, ostracodes, and your research here at the Smithsonian.
Thanks, it's my pleasure.
Can you tell our viewers where they can learn a little bit more about your work or fossils in general?
Sure. So if you want to learn more about paleontology at the Natural History Museum here at the Smithsonian, you should check out the paleobiology website here at the Natural History Museum. If you're more broadly curious about fossils found in your area, I encourage you to check out the resource called the Paleobiology Database. And with this database, it's basically a repository for a bunch of information for wherever paleontologists have found fossils. You could look at your area and see what fossils have been found nearby. You could look under different fossils, like dinosaurs or maybe even ostracodes, and see where they've been found.
That's a tool that I have played around with in the past, and it is very cool.
Yeah.
So Paleobiology Database. Very cool. Jean, thank you so much for being here today. It was really great having you.
My pleasure.
Viewers, thank you so much for tuning in and for sending us all of your wonderful questions. If you missed part of this broadcast or want to view it again, it'll be archived later this evening at curious.si.edu. Thank you so much for joining us here today to learn more about paleontology. We hope to see you next time.